So thank you, everybody. That was great. I love the diversity of perspective. But because this is a journalism conference, I have to start, Summer, with the first question to you, which is, and I love BuzzFeed. I got to say for the record, I love BuzzFeed. But you said that you still do kind of subscribe to the let's just get as much growth as possible, and that will be the key to our success, which has worked for you. On the other hand, if the FT story is correct, that the bloom is off the rose of this sort of exponential growth. I mean, you still make a lot of money, but traffic to your owned and operated sites, flat, and revenue perhaps not quite as rosy as
Yeah, so
expected.
One thing I will say is that as reported in Recode today, the details of that story actually aren't, we did not slash our revenue goals in half for this year. As far as the business model and Kenny Lehrer, he's on the board. He went on the record in Recode. You guys can read all about it. As far as the revenue in general, I think that our core value is impact. And that's what we talk about across the business team, across the news team, across the entertainment team. It's what Jonah emphasizes, and we kind of think about company-wide. The reality of that is that the model is shifting so quickly. As you said, it's different today than it was a year ago. I think that we're in one of the best positions in the world to take advantage of what's going to be new. But I think we're in a real transition phase in terms of just being able to catch up. Even just the timelines of how people are used to doing advertising and branded content. By the time that you sell a deal on Periscope, Facebook Live is now the big deal. And so because this is changing so quickly, I think we have to figure out how to make our business more nimble and agile, and we have to figure out how we can convince brands to come along with us on that. But I think we're in a really great position to do so. And we are profitable, which is more than some startups and tech companies can say. We're actually very profitable. And so I'm really excited, and I think we have great potential. And I think it's really just about managing expectations for how fast we can keep up with the shifting landscape.
One of the things that in my intro with ticking through all of those events of the last year that I didn't mention that also came out of F8 and others is that, well, particularly with Facebook, is they're opening up the sort of embracing branded content and allowing publishers to publish more branded content to Facebook. Again, great for the monetization model, but just more and more one step further from everything sort of happening on those platforms. So very interesting what's going on. I want to shift gears and talk about, how we publish to these different platforms. Again, some I'm not picking on you, but you talked about how what you find is what works well across various platforms. I'd be curious on the rest of the panelists' view on that, specifically because it feels like, and you can dispute this, that the platforms are sort of falling into three broad categories. One is sort of the broadcast platforms like Snapchat and Instagram. They really are sort of a broadcast model. The sort of the social, which almost feels like a quaint term, platforms, which Facebook fits into all these models, but Facebook and Twitter, and then really sort of the personal platforms, which are the messaging apps. So, Messenger, WhatsApp, Line, and the rest of it. So I'm curious, those are all very different use cases, how you think about publishing to those different platforms given their very, very different sort of dynamics. I'll let it go just to have somebody else speak.
Sure. So, I think before we get to that point, there's a layer behind that, which is putting in place, first of all, the taxonomy, the metadata, the tagging, the structure to allow us to be able to play in those spaces, particularly around Messenger and chats, which, as you pointed out, was so brilliant about what Zach did at Quartz, which is building the baseline for that type of experience moving forward.
I hope you're here, Zach. Are you here?
And then there's also the workflow piece of it. In a newsroom like the Globe, what I've been fond of saying is, it's not print first, and everybody in this room would understand this. It's what is the best way? As editors, we need to constantly be asking, what is the best way for us to tell that story on Snapchat? What is the best way for us to tell that story on WhatsApp, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Vine, on Facebook, on bostonglobe.com, and oh, by the way, in print. And that shift is one that I can't lie. I mean, we're a long way from getting to that point where we have, quite honestly, the luxury of being able to have our teams think of things that way. And the other piece of it that is really all before you even get to that point is the analytical rigor. You know, one of the things that I've found, I was saying to someone last night, the hardest thing to recruit for right now are social media editors who come with a strong data background, who are able to test their way into all these platforms. Because, as Summer pointed out, you don't have a watermelon video success without testing 75 or 100 different versions until you get to that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And so all of those cultural challenges are things that we're trying to get at the root of first before we start thinking about the platforms.
Borja, you want to address this?
Yeah. I would say there is one reality that is Facebook, and then there are the rest of the realities. No, and the rest, I mean, we are testing, we are innovating, we are trying messaging apps, we are trying Snapchat, but in a data-driven newsroom, and with all the pressures you have, you're very trapped right now, no? You were speaking at the beginning about referrals. I mean, I think referrals, the problem is they still matter a lot, no, I mean, each of us have different numbers, but half of the audience that comes to our O&O comes from Facebook. So, and that's huge. That's huge, no? So it's, I think we have to separate Facebook from the rest.
Okay. I was going to just ask Robin, is that the case for you too? Do you think about publishing to these platforms, or is it all about Facebook?
No, I actually think it is, you know, different strategies for different platforms. I mean, one of the things, just like, you know, what we publish and how we publish for print audiences is different than it is actually for desktop and than it is for mobile. I think each of those social platforms, you know, has a different audience, has different behaviors, and what we have to do is learn to be native to those platforms so that we understand those behaviors and those audiences and can speak that language. You know, our Snapchat is a great example. Our entertainment site uses Snapchat really extensively, but our main Dallas News really doesn't, because we don't feel like we have the right voice and we have the right approach, you know, with Snapchat yet. Now, that's not to say we won't, but at the moment, that's not necessarily what we think is the best platform for us. But we use, you know, Instagram really extensively because we have wonderful photojournalists and videographers who can tell great visual stories, and Instagram's a great platform for that. So, I mean, the challenge is getting enough people who have enough knowledge and who are constantly learning to be able to, you know, really continuously calibrate for each of those different channels.
Summer, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say that I think that we have the thing too that's like it's Facebook and everything else. You know, there is a difference sort of in scale when you're talking about Facebook and you're talking about these other platforms. But I also think that the thing that I am sort of one of the things that I'm most focused on is just, this goes to the data, trying to understand the difference between what a view is on these different platforms and what it means. On something like Snapchat, where I can say from personal experience, I sort of watch out of the corner of my eye as I page through 30 pages of someone's Snapchat story versus someone listening to an hour-long BuzzFeed podcast. Those two things have very different values. And so figuring out the metrics for how we look at these different platforms in comparison to each other, I think is going to be a big challenge and interesting thing in this year.
Yeah, one more thing I would like to add. I think in this moment it's very important to make choices. Because sometimes we speak about newsrooms with 800 people, 700 people, 1,000 people, and you can be all over the place, no? But that's not the reality of many newsrooms. And you have Snapchat, and you have messaging, and you have everything, no? So you have to be very careful where you put your efforts.
No question, and on where you put your efforts, that gives me an introduction to my next question I want to talk about, and this was inspired by a conversation I had last night with Trey Burdett, who's somewhere here, with Fox, who runs product, and also from a post that Corey Bergman of NBC Universal's Breaking News, a post that he put on Medium last night. I'm just going to read it because it really is the question. Corey says, the sooner we as an industry admit that Facebook and Google and Apple and Snapchat are running the tables on media innovation, mobile and video innovation, the sooner we'll do something about it. The sooner we'll take exponentially bigger, patient bets to solve real problems. The sooner we'll embrace failure instead of saying we do, only to lay off the very teams who fail trying to invent the future. The sooner we'll invest to recruit the best developers, designers, and product leads, empowering them to break the rules and accomplish things we never imagined. In other words, are we outsourcing product innovation to the platforms where they have much bigger teams than any newsroom ever will, and where it's very hard to break through and collaborate with them on product innovation? And do we not, as an industry, have a responsibility to tackle product innovation ourselves as a guard against sort of having a little more control over our own destiny? So, sorry, that's a bit of a high concept, but I do want to talk about how each of your newsrooms, understanding there's different sizes, approaches being able to create the technology to reinvent the future. Borja, I'll start with you.
Well, I don't give up. I mean, I think we have a responsibility and many things to say in that environment around innovation. I mean, we have built it an Univision, an innovation team, small innovation team, that the most important thing that this team that has been in place for 2 months has done for me is mixing. It's not about creating new software, but mixing themselves with the rest of the newsroom and starting to change the mentality of each of the journalists. So it's not only about product, it's about workflows, it's about how journalists think. And if we're thinking in live blogging, for example, how we make those journalists start having a conversation about how we should show our live blogging on mobile, for example. And the priorities of some of the platforms, Facebook or whoever, they are not always going to match with our priorities. And I put the example about that live blogging on mobile platforms because I've been thinking for this for the last 3 years, and it's very difficult to find someone that really shows a good experience of live blogging where you can see the whole big picture in your screen. So I think we need, and we have the responsibility to think about all these issues. Not everything is about building the new platform, because that's, I think it's a mistake that some of the media have gone through. I'm going to build a new platform. No, and innovation is much more than that.
By the way, David, before you speak, we're going to go to audience questions, so if you want to come down to the mics while we continue.
This, to me, is the most important question. I think not just news organizations, but most industries today are wrestling with 3 key issues. One is a mindset gap, the second one is a skills gap, and the third one is a technology gap. And on the mindset front, to Borja's point, I recently heard a study from Oxford that said that in the next 20 years, 40% of the jobs that exist in the United States today will be obsolete. You think about driverless cars and the impact that could have on the auto industry and the whole ecosystem around that is one example. So from a mindset standpoint, it's the very nature of continually adapting and having process that is fundamental to not just our organization, but all organizations that has to come into play. So the idea of change being inevitable and constant, and which leads to the second point of the skills gap, hiring people who can be adaptive, hiring people who understand and embrace change as it comes, not afraid of it. And the third one being the technology gap, which a lot of us are really trying to overcome or leapfrog through the technology deficit that we have from legacy content management systems and other things. All of that is the framing around how do we innovate. And I think we have to address all 3 of those issues.
I mean, BuzzFeed prides itself on being a sort of full stack, vertically integrated company. We're a tech company, is what we say. And so product is incredibly important to what we do. And when I started 4 years ago, I was so impressed with the custom-built CMS. It was like, you can drag GIFs from one tab right into our CMS, and it's so easy. And that, I think, in this new world of distributed is increasingly, shouldn't be the priority of our product team, won't be. And what we're focused on, though, I think, is continuing to use the fact that we're a data-driven tech company, to our advantage in thinking about distribution. So our product team is building tools for how we categorize and upload distributed content, how we look at video, how we measure data. We have database tools that help those creators look at and upload those things. It is a challenge. It's not easy because these platforms are ever shifting, but I think we just have to sort of shift those creative tech resources towards the new landscape.
Yeah, and I think the product gap is a real one, especially in smaller news organizations. I mean, we are lucky in Dallas to have a lot of support across the board. One of the reasons I've been in Dallas now for about 7 months, and one of the reasons I went was because there was a real commitment to crossing that product gap. We are working with a boutique firm that has built a custom CMS for us that actually really does prioritize the use cases of our journalists and how we want to produce content. We have reorganized our staff in the last year, and in fact, half the staff basically has new jobs, and we brought in a whole lot of people with technical skills, data news apps developers, interactive developers, audience developers, and just hired an audience analyst. These are jobs that didn't exist in regional news organizations, newspaper organizations in the past, and I think all of those things are helping us to fill that gap, but it's a big one, and it's one we're going to have to continue to keep really focusing on.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move to questions. I think the first one is over here. If you could introduce yourself before your question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michal from Argentina. I'm sorry if my English is not that good. My question is actually for Borja. I wanted to understand, you mentioned before that the TV is not as in danger as a business as the newspapers. And I wanted to understand through your thoughts or your understanding and acknowledgement, why is that?
I mean, probably my English is very bad, and I didn't explain well myself. I think TV is in exactly the same point where newspapers were a decade ago. And you just have to look at the audience. What I was saying is that the business model, it is still a little bit healthy, and that is what is allowing us to move quickly to the digital landscape. But I mean, I think the things are going to move very quickly in the same direction as it happened to other industries, not only newspapers, but to other industries. So yeah, I
think in some ways the fact that television still makes so much money in some ways can hold back innovation as much as it allows you to.
Yeah, and so that doesn't happen. You need strong leaderships in these companies. Now, if you have a leader that really and truly believes that what we have seen before is going to happen, and from someone that comes from newspapers, I think it's an amazing experience moving from a newspaper to a TV and listening exactly the same conversations I listened 10 years ago with the same type of people. No, you can divide the people in the same. They say the same thing, so it's nothing special.
We have a question on this side.
Hi, my name is Laura Lorick, and I run a site called Silicon Hills News here in Austin and San Antonio that covers tech. My question for you is, David, in particular, you mentioned the East and the West Coast bias. And I know recently Condé Nast just opened up a digital innovation center in Austin. And we also have the largest campus here outside of Silicon Valley for Apple, Facebook. GM has an innovation center here. AT&T has an innovation center. I'm just wondering why more media companies, which I come from that background, don't have innovation centers in the tech hubbubs like Austin? And are we going to see more of that coming?
Yeah. I thought you were going to take that direction the question in a different direction. So I'm not sure how to answer in terms of media companies. I can only speak for us. I can't speak for others, and would never pretend to just say that we're focused on where we can have the most impact and generate the most revenue. I suspect for the larger chains, I think they're also looking at the scale and the audience reach. And where I thought you were going to take that question was more of why aren't they going to these areas? And I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a cultural one. Would be my guess, but I don't really have a good answer for you.
This side.
Hi, I'm Diego from LifePost. Borja, you said that you wanted to see who was reinventing live blogging on mobile. We're doing that, so I'd love to talk to you. And my question is, for small online publishers, how much of a budget would you recommend them to assign to social media and these kinds of platforms? So how much of the budget? It's open to anybody.
I mean, I don't know if specifically I would assign a budget for that. No, I think that's a part of the core. I think you can't separate that from what you need is people that can think in everything, in reporting, in social, but making a division between the social media people and the rest of the people. I think it's not maybe you need some specialists, people that really know and very data-driven, as David was saying before, but I would try to make it as organic as possible.
Newspapers have traditionally spent a lot of money trying to get their news into people's driveways. We had circulation people, we had people throwing those papers, and so a commitment to distribution, I think, has to be a part of what we do, and part of that is developing audience teams and social media experts, but being comfortable with SEM and all of the different tools that you can use to get your stuff in front of people. But part of it is also just about hiring the right people. We talk about T-shaped people who have broad, wide skills but can go deep in certain areas, and making sure that you have people who themselves are able to use all of the tools at their disposal to get their content in front of the audiences that are most interested in it.
It's interesting, the categories of executives in news organizations has remained pretty static for a very long time until recently, and now almost all successful news organizations have at the highest level someone that goes by different names but is around audience engagement. I guess that would have been the circulation person prior. Question over here.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Groves with Drury University in Springfield, Missouri, in one of those little small center places. And one of the things that I've always been really concerned about, I'm concerned about local journalism and doing meaningful local journalism that people will connect to. I think a lot of us have been really excited about what's happened with the Panama Papers and how that's resonated and connected. I'm wondering how you apply the lessons of things like what you've learned from the exploding watermelon to some of these more investigative or deeper journalism projects. What are you learning in the fun spaces, and how are you applying them to what we would consider more journalistic or more impactful?
I can go first. So, in Dallas, we have a big premium. We've always done big J journalism and care a lot about doing the kind of things that are important to our community. But even beyond that, I mean, we still have an investigative team that does stuff that is, really broad-reaching and powerful. What has changed, though, I think, is our approach and the way we think about how we get that journalism to people, rather than just simply saying, okay, we're going to work for 6 months on this wonderful project, and we're going to put it out there and push the button and say, okay, we're spending a lot more time talking about the approach to distribution, building, campaigns in essence to make sure that we get this thing that we've invested a lot into the hands of as many people as possible. Sometimes that means, just social cards and But a lot of it is A/B testing headlines. We had a project not long ago where we put it up and it wasn't doing what we thought it needed to do. So we kept testing headlines. We tested 11 headlines until we found one that finally was starting to find an audience and that was able to get us some lift. And I think it's being dogged about really considering, who cares about this thing that you think is important as a journalist, and what are all the different tools that we have, in our toolbooks to try to get this thing into those people's hands. And what happens is when you do that, especially with investigative journalism, especially with enterprise journalism, we're seeing that the wonderful thing, I think, about mobile is that people are reading longer. There's a lot of assumptions about mobile that, people only want quick hit stuff, and yes, they want things that are quick and they're fun, and they want exploding watermelons, but they also want Panama Papers, and they also want, a big investigative piece that we put out yesterday about, the U.S. government's role in increasing the drug wars as a result of, a deal they made with a cartel leader. That's an important story that we told, that we took 6 months to tell, and it's getting, I think it's got, yesterday, I was looking at one point, I had like 8 minutes of engaged minutes of time on an individual article. You don't get that very often, and so, you do good work, and then you spend a lot of time figuring out how to get it into people's hands.
Just on the local front as well, I think the key is for us, get everybody in a room as early as possible in the process. Don't leave the audience engagement folks out or the video people out until the end when you've got a completed, I'm not going to say story, when you have a completed article. Because there is a distinction between the article and the story, and I know that's obvious, you would think, but actually, when you're, for 146 years, when your entire workflow and culture has been devoted to the print article, it's really tough to shake that up and make people think about what is the true story. And so we have a great team of multimedia editors led by Laura Amico who go in at the very beginning with the editors of our Spotlight team, which are investigative. I guess I don't need to explain who the Spotlight team is anymore.
Not anymore.
I used to. She goes in very early and starts conceiving of what is the true story here, and then it's okay. Now, how do we best tell that story in video format, in social, and everything else? I mean, the most recent example, it wasn't an investigation, but it was an editorial done by the opinion team this past weekend about Donald Trump. That there was a whole outreach program around that was, I would consider, a success as well. The irony of that one is we were actually focused on the platform of print for that particular social campaign. But really, it's breaking down that barrier of thinking about platform and more thinking about story and then taking it out from there.
Yeah, and I just think, what you said about mobile is so true, and speaking to how you take the learnings from these fun things and apply them, I think it's really just about paying a lot of attention to your audience. And as you said in your presentation, that's an advantage of this new ecosystem. We have a much closer relationship to our audience, whereas 4 years ago we were hoping that people would create accounts on BuzzFeed.com and sign in so that we could understand, who they were. Now we read thousands of comments. We see what people say when they share. And I think that applies for the people doing fun entertainment content, but it's also true for our journalists. They can understand, did people engage with this? What did they think of it? What did they think of the tone? How long, we track how long people, where people drop off in a story. And the mobile thing was one of the, when we started doing long form features, it was one of the most sort of interesting nuggets of information that our data science team came was, long form actually over indexes for mobile. We found that people were reading long form on mobile even more than they were reading our lists and quizzes and things like that. And so that was a really interesting thing, and we started taking this mobile first approach to the product of our long form format and how we make that.
Yeah, and you mentioned Panama Papers, no? And I can speak a little bit about this because Univision with Fusion and McClatchy were the only media in the US that had Panama Papers from the beginning. And I mean, the obsession with distribution is getting bigger and bigger in the conversations, no? And everybody's part of that. It's not always easy. What David was telling, put everybody in the same room from the beginning, and that's the perfect situation. But when you have investigations and investigative reporters, many times they want to keep it at least for as much time as possible, to keep it tight to a certain group. No, but once it opens, all the conversation of how we distribute it, and in this case with Panama Papers, we had a lot of stories from Venezuela, from Costa Rica, from all the countries from Latin America, that was our main focus. And in the team, we had reporters from Venezuela, from Costa Rica. So the way you distribute is not only, hey, let's post on Twitter, let's post on Facebook. No, the journalist from Venezuela, she will go and speak to important people that she knows in Venezuela that is going to help us to distribute the content. So you start thinking, going little by little, each piece, how we're going to move each piece. No? So there is a very important work there.
We have time for just one, hopefully, short question, or short answer, I should say.
Sure, yeah, the question will be very short. My name is Pei. I'm the graduate student from School of Journalism at UT Austin. So my question concerns about the quality of content in the age of the distributed online ecosystem. So it seems like everyone mentions about the quality of content still matters, but it seems to me like the quality is defined in the way, like how much traffic it would attract from the audience size. So my question is, if it makes a lot of sense that if like a content attract millions of likes, or it was shared by thousands of times, but like increase the problems of like the spirit of silence. Seems like the minority voices will get to be even more minority, and the less popular content would be even less popular. Thank you.
Wow, that's a big subject that I'm not sure we really have time to tackle. I'm actually going to leave it as a... The question is in the question, yes, the answer is in the question. So thank you. That's a good note to end on. And thank you, everybody, and Rosenthal.